They whispered "Grandma" when she walked past the nurse's station. Dr. Preston Sterling, the hospital's golden boy with a senator for a father, actually wagered $1,000 that the new, older nurse wouldn't survive her first month at the prestigious medical facility. She was too methodical. Her hands trembled when she reached for instruments. She didn't belong in their world of cutting-edge medicine and designer scrubs. But the mockery evaporated the moment trauma bay doors exploded open and a critically wounded general was rushed in on a gurney because the dying man with a chest full of medals didn't look at the chief surgeon in his pristine white coat. He looked at the trembling nurse they'd treated like a janitor, and through the fog of shock and blood loss managed to lift one shaking hand in recognition. What happened next didn't just silence the arrogance, it shattered every assumption in that sterile fluorescent room. The overhead lights at St. Jude's Elite Medical Center cast their cold clinical glow across polished floors that reflected nothing but perfection. This wasn't just a hospital, it was a monument to modern medicine where surgeons trained at prestigious institutions performed procedures that made headlines. These weren't ordinary doctors, they were artists in white coats, architects of life and death, each one groomed for greatness with degrees that hung on walls like trophies. And then there was Helen. Helen Pearson stood beside the supply cabinet in the West Wing corridor, methodically organizing packages of sterile gauze. She was 52, with striking silver-gray hair pulled back into a tight, functional bun that hadn't seen a hairstylist in years. Her scrubs hung loose on her frame, 2 sizes too big, as if she was trying to disappear inside them. She didn't sprint down hallways with the frantic energy of the younger staff, who wore their scrubs like fashion statements. Helen moved with a deliberate, measured pace that made the residents grind their teeth in frustration. "Helen, double-check those expiration dates." Dr. Sterling's voice cut across the corridor from where he leaned against the nurse's station, not even bothering to glance up from his phone. He was 33, sharp-featured with the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word no, and he wore his status as chief resident like a crown. "I already verified them twice, doctor." Helen's voice was quiet, almost hoarse, like gravel scraped across concrete. "Then verify them a third time," Sterling smirked, catching the eye of a young nurse named Madison, who was adjusting her hair in the reflection of a computer monitor. "Can't have patients dying because someone with shaky hands grabbed the wrong medication. Age-related decline is insidious." Madison covered her giggle with her hand. "Dr. Sterling, that's harsh." "I'm being responsible," Sterling announced loud enough for the entire floor to hear. "Administration keeps hiring these legacy cases. I mean, just look at her. The tremor in her hands is visible from 10 feet away." It was true. Helen's hands carried a subtle but unmistakable tremor, a rhythmic shake that became more pronounced when she was tired. To a surgeon like Sterling, it might as well have been a flashing red warning sign. Helen said nothing. She gripped the box of gauze tighter, her knuckles whitening, and continued her task. She'd only been at St. Jude's for 3 weeks. In that time, she'd been assigned every graveyard shift, every cleanup nobody wanted, every degrading task that could be dumped on the new hire. They treated her like she was doing them a favor by being allowed to work there. "I heard she worked at some nowhere clinic before this," Dr. Cole muttered, loud enough to be heard. "Probably spent 30 years putting bandages on scraped knees. Now she thinks she can handle level 1 trauma?" "She won't make it," Sterling said, finally looking up and straightening his immaculate white coat. "I give her a week, maybe 2. One real crisis, one code black situation, and she'll freeze. Then we can bring in someone who actually belongs in this century." Helen finished organizing the supplies. She walked past them, eyes fixed on the linoleum tiles, shoulders rigid with a posture that didn't quite match the defeated image they saw. She wasn't deaf. Every word landed like a precision strike. The insults stung, but they were nothing compared to the phantom sensations that haunted her, the remembered heat of explosions, the metallic taste of fear, the weight of lives slipping through her fingers. She retreated to the break room, poured herself a cup of bitter, hours-old coffee, and sat in the corner chair that nobody else wanted. She rubbed her right knee, which ached with a deep
bone-level pain whenever the weather shifted. "Just keep your head down, Helen," she told herself. "You need this job. You need the normalcy. You need the quiet." But the quiet was about to detonate. The alarm didn't just sound, it shrieked. Not the standard code blue for a cardiac arrest, but the piercing two-tone wail that signaled something catastrophic. The PA system crackled to life with an edge of controlled panic. "Code black, multiple casualties inbound, ETA 2 minutes. All surgical teams report to trauma immediately. This is not a drill." The hospital transformed in an instant. The casual cruelty vanished, replaced by organized chaos. Residents sprinted, equipment rolled, doors slammed open. "Everyone, move now," Sterling's voice boomed as he strode toward the trauma bay, his arrogance seamlessly shifting into command authority as he strode toward the trauma bay. Helen stood slowly, setting down her coffee with hands that suddenly weren't shaking at all. Something ancient and instinctive stirred in her chest, something that had nothing to do with age or tremors or the quiet life she'd been trying to build. She walked toward the trauma bay with a different kind of purpose, the fluorescent lights catching the steel in her gray eyes, the same eyes that once stared down death in desert sandstorms and brought soldiers back from the edge of oblivion. They were about to discover that Helen Pearson wasn't a scared old nurse trying to survive. She was a ghost who'd already walked through hell, and hell had just walked through their doors.
Before we continue, subscribe to SOF Stories for raw, cinematic accounts of Navy SEALs and Special Forces, where one moment can rewrite history. The bet was placed on a Tuesday morning, right there in the doctor's lounge where the espresso machine cost more than most people's monthly rent. $1,000, Dr. Sterling announced, slapping a crisp stack of bills onto the marble countertop. Says the grandma doesn't make it to the end of the month. Dr. Cole looked up from his protein shake, eyebrows raised. "That's cold, even for you." "It's not cold, it's inevitable." Sterling leaned back against the counter, arms crossed over his designer scrubs that probably cost more than Helen's entire wardrobe. "She's a liability waiting to happen. 3 weeks and she hasn't completed a single shift without slowing everyone down. She rechecks everything like she's got early onset dementia. Those hands?" He made an exaggerated shaking motion. "It's only a matter of time before she drops something critical or makes a fatal error." "She hasn't made any mistakes yet," Dr. Reeves pointed out quietly from the corner, not looking up from her tablet. "Yet" being the operative word. Sterling picked up his coffee, took a sip, and smiled. "Look, I'm not the villain here. I'm protecting patients. This is an elite facility. We deal with the worst traumas on the East Coast. We don't have room for charity cases who should be retired in Florida playing bingo." The other residents exchanged glances. Nobody took the bet, but nobody defended Helen either. That was how it worked at St. Jude's, survival of the fittest, and Helen Pearson clearly wasn't fit. Sterling found her an hour later in the storage room, counting inventory with a clipboard and that maddeningly slow, methodical approach that made him want to scream. "Helen," he didn't say it kindly. She turned, and for just a split second, Sterling could have sworn he saw something sharp flash in her eyes before it disappeared behind that tired, submissive expression. "Yes, doctor? I need you to prep Trauma Bay 3, full setup. We've got a VIP transfer coming in this afternoon. Congressman's wife, routine gallbladder surgery, but she wanted the best facility in Virginia." He made air quotes with his fingers. "Think you can handle that without your hands giving out?" Helen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, doctor." "Good, because if there's even one instrument out of place, one tray not properly sterilized, I'm writing you up. 3 strikes and you're gone. You're already at 2. That wasn't true. Helen had 0 formal complaints in her file, but Sterling knew she wouldn't argue. People like her never did. "I understand," Helen said quietly. "Great." Sterling turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "Oh, and Helen, maybe consider switching to decaf. Might help with the shakes." He walked away before she could respond, his laughter echoing down the corridor. Helen stood there for a long moment, gripping the clipboard so tightly the metal clip bent under her fingers. She took a slow breath, held it, and released it the way she'd been taught in another life, the 4-count tactical breathing that kept soldiers calm under fire. "You don't know me," she thought.
You don't know what these hands have done." But she said nothing. She just went back to counting supplies. 2 days later, Helen was at the nurse's station filling out patient charts when Sterling decided to make a spectacle of her tremor. "Everyone, quick question," he announced loudly, drawing the attention of the 5 nurses and 3 residents scattered around the station. "Show of hands, who here would feel comfortable having Helen start an IV on them?" Silence, uncomfortable shuffling. "Come on, be honest." Sterling was grinning now, enjoying himself. "Helen, show them your hands. Hold them out." Helen slowly set down her pen. She looked at Sterling with an expression that was impossible to read. Not quite anger, not quite resignation. Something older and colder. "Doctor, I don't think," Madison, the young nurse, started to say. "It's fine," Helen said quietly. She extended both hands, palms down. The tremor was visible. Not extreme, but unmistakable. A subtle rhythmic shake that never quite stopped. "Now imagine those hands trying to thread a central line," Sterling continued, circling around Helen like a prosecutor presenting evidence. "Imagine those hands in a high-pressure trauma situation, trying to clamp a bleeder or place a chest tube. How confident does that make you feel?" "My tremor has never interfered with patient care," Helen said, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "I've successfully completed every task assigned to me." "So far," Sterling shot back. "But statistics don't lie, Helen. Motor function degrades with age. Reaction time slows. This isn't personal, it's biology. You're a lawsuit waiting to happen. And frankly, I'm shocked administration hasn't—" He was cut off by his pager shrieking, then another pager, then every pager, phone, and radio in the station erupted simultaneously. The overhead announcement crackled. "Code Black, multiple trauma inbound, military transport, ETA 90 seconds, all hands to Trauma Bay immediately." The world shifted into a different gear. The mockery evaporated, replaced by pure adrenaline-fueled focus. Doctors and nurses scattered like shrapnel, grabbing equipment, shouting orders, racing toward the trauma bays. Sterling was already running, his white coat billowing behind him. "Clear Bay 1, I want O-negative blood standing by. Crash cart ready, and get anesthesia down here."
Helen moved too, but differently. While everyone else sprinted in controlled panic, she walked with purpose. Her tremor mysteriously absent as she pulled on gloves and tied her surgical mask. Her eyes had changed, no longer tired and defeated, but focused with a laser intensity that would have been unsettling if anyone had bothered to notice. The ambulance bay doors exploded open with a metallic crash. 4 gurneys rushed in simultaneously, each carrying casualties from what looked like an IED strike. Military personnel in blood-soaked fatigues surrounded the stretchers, shouting vitals and injuries. "Male, approximately 45, penetrating chest trauma, BP dropping. Femoral artery lac, bilateral. Shrapnel to the abdomen, suspected internal bleeding." And on the 4th gurney, the one surrounded by the most personnel, the one with men shouting orders with barely controlled desperation. 4-star general, catastrophic injuries, sucking chest wound, possible collapsed lung, get him to Bay 1 now. Helen saw him before anyone else truly registered what they were looking at. General Jimmy Snyder was a massive man, even lying on a gurney. His desert camouflage uniform was shredded and soaked with blood that spread across his chest in a dark, wet bloom. His face was gray, lips tinged blue from hypoxia, and his breathing came in shallow, desperate gasps. Multiple medals decorated what remained of his uniform, a silver star, bronze stars with valor, a purple heart. This wasn't just a patient, this was a legend. Sterling took command of Bay 1, his arrogance shifting seamlessly into surgical authority. "I need exposure of the chest wound, 2 large-bore IVs, type and cross for 10 units, and someone get me a chest X-ray portable stat." Helen positioned herself at the foot of the gurney, observing. Everyone else was focused on the obvious wound, the gaping laceration across the general's neck and upper chest, blood pulsing with each heartbeat. It looked catastrophic. It looked like the injury that was killing him. But Helen was watching something else. She was watching his trachea.
It was deviating, shifting to the right with each labored breath, a subtle but unmistakable sign that even the most experienced surgeons could miss in the chaos of a major trauma. "We need to intubate," Sterling announced, already reaching for the laryngoscope. "Get me a 7.5 endotracheal tube, now." "Doctor?" Helen started. "Not now, Helen. Cole, give me suction. Reeves, start the propofol." "His trachea is shifting," Helen said, louder this time. "That's swelling from the neck trauma. We need to secure his airway before—" "It's not swelling." Helen's voice cut through the chaos with an edge that made several people glance at her. "His trachea is deviating to the right. Decreased breath sounds on the left side. Jugular vein distension. He has a tension pneumothorax." "Thank you for the WebMD diagnosis, Helen, but I'm trying to save this man's life." Sterling's voice dripped with condescension. "The wound is clearly—" The general's oxygen saturation alarm shrieked. The numbers dropped. 88, 85, 82. "He's desaturating," Callison called out. "Then we intubate faster." Sterling positioned the laryngoscope. "Open his mouth." "If you intubate him, you'll kill him," Helen said. The room went silent, except for the screaming monitors. Sterling slowly turned to look at her, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. "What did you just say?" Helen stepped forward, and something in her posture changed. Her spine straightened to military rigidity, her shoulders squared. The tremor in her hands vanished completely, and when she spoke, it wasn't the voice of a timid nurse trying to survive. It was the voice of someone who'd commanded men under fire in Fallujah when everyone else said they were already dead. The pressure in his chest is collapsing his lung and compressing his heart. Every second you waste on that neck wound, you're letting the real killer tighten its grip. He needs immediate needle decompression, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. He needs it now or he dies in the next 60 seconds. "You're a nurse. You don't get to—" The general's blood pressure dropped to 70/40. His lips were purple now. His eyes were rolling back. "He's crashing!" someone yelled. Sterling hesitated for one fatal second, his ego warring with the small, terrified part of his brain that wondered if she might be right. Helen didn't hesitate. She moved with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for someone who'd been mocked for being too slow. Her hand shot out, grabbing a 14-gauge needle from the crash cart. In the same motion, she stepped directly into Sterling's space, her elbow connecting with his sternum, not violently, but with enough tactical force to move him exactly 3 feet to the left. "What the hell?" Sterling staggered backward. Helen was already at the general's side. Her hands, those supposedly incompetent, shaking hands, moved with absolute certainty. She located the anatomical landmark with her fingers, counting ribs with the muscle memory of someone who'd done it in the dark, under fire, with enemy rounds snapping overhead. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. "You can't— This is assault!" Sterling was shouting, but he sounded far away. Helen drove the needle into the general's chest. For one frozen heartbeat, nothing happened. Then came the sound, a sharp, explosive hiss of pressurized air escaping through the catheter. It was the sound of a trap being released, of death being cheated by inches. The general's chest expanded. Color flooded back into his face. The oxygen saturation monitor began climbing. 85, 88, 92, 95. His eyes fluttered open, confused and disoriented, searching the faces above him until they landed on Helen. For a moment, nothing else existed except that gaze. The general's lips moved, but no sound came out. His hand, a hand that had signed orders sending thousands of men into battle, began to rise, trembling with effort. Helen caught it gently and lowered it back down. "Easy, sir. You're going to be okay." The trauma bay was silent, except for the steady beep of monitors, now showing stable vitals. Sterling stood frozen, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and the dawning horror of a man who'd just been exposed as incompetent in front of everyone. "Security," he finally choked out. "Someone call security. This woman just assaulted a doctor and performed an invasive procedure without authorization. She's done. Her career is finished. I want her arrested." The door to the trauma bay opened, and a man in an Air Force dress uniform stepped through, a full colonel, his chest heavy with ribbons and his expression harder than granite. "That won't be necessary, Doctor, because that woman just saved the life of the Joint Chief's most decorated combat commander." His eyes swept the room before settling on Helen with something like recognition. "And unless I'm very much mistaken, she did it the same way she saved 16 men under fire in Fallujah when everyone else said they were already dead." Helen's face remained expressionless, but her hands, steady, capable hands, began to shake again, just slightly. Sterling's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. The colonel continued, "That grandma you've been mocking? She's Lieutenant Colonel Helen Pearson, retired, Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, and a commendation signed by 2 presidents. They called her the Ghost Medic because she pulled off battlefield surgeries that shouldn't have been possible." He paused, letting the words sink in like a blade between ribs. "So before you talk about arrests, Doctor, maybe you should consider that you nearly killed a 4-star general because you were too arrogant to listen when a real combat surgeon tried to save his life." The silence in the trauma bay was absolute. Helen closed her eyes for just a moment, and when she opened them, they were glistening with something that might have been tears or might have been the residue of memories she'd spent years trying to bury. "I just wanted a quiet life," she said, softly to no one in particular. "I just wanted the screaming to stop." But as the monitors beeped steadily and the general's breathing grew stronger, Helen Pearson knew the truth she'd been running from. Some ghosts couldn't be buried. Some battles never really ended. And sometimes the people who mock you for being broken have no idea that you were forged in fire they couldn't survive for 5 minutes. Sterling backed slowly toward the door, his pristine white coat suddenly looking like a costume rather than a uniform. The bet, the mockery, the casual cruelty, all of it evaporated in the face of a simple, devastating truth. They never knew who she really was. But now, in a room that smelled like blood and antiseptic and the metallic tang of humility, they were beginning to understand that Helen Pearson wasn't the one who didn't belong. She was the only one in the room who truly did. The administrator's office was on the top floor with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the entire medical complex. Helen had never been up here before. Staff like her, the expendable ones, rarely were. Marcus Henderson sat behind a desk that probably cost more than Helen's car, his fingers steepled beneath his chin in a pose that screamed calculated authority. He was 50-something, with silver hair that looked professionally maintained and a suit that whispered money. Behind him, the St. Jude's logo gleamed on the wall. Excellence, innovation, prestige. Helen stood in front of the desk, still in her scrubs, which were spotted with the general's blood. She hadn't been given time to change. 2 security guards flanked the door behind her, like she was a criminal. "Do you understand the position you've put this hospital in?" Henderson didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet disappointment was weapon enough. "I saved a man's life," she said simply. "You assaulted a senior physician and performed an unauthorized invasive procedure." Henderson opened a folder on his desk, though Helen suspected it was just for show. "Dr. Sterling has filed a formal complaint. The hospital's legal team is already preparing for potential litigation. We have security footage of you physically striking him." "I moved him out of the way. The patient was under Dr. Sterling's care. You are a nurse, Miss Pearson, not a physician, not a surgeon. You don't get to override medical decisions, especially not with physical force." He leaned forward. "Do you have any idea how this looks? A nurse attacking a doctor in the middle of a trauma? The press would have a field day. Senator Sterling has already called me personally." Of course he had. Power protecting power. The patient would have died, Helen said, and there was steel in her voice now. Dr. Sterling missed a tension pneumothorax. Every second he wasted on that neck wound, the pressure was building in the general's chest. Another 30 seconds, and his heart would have stopped. That's not your determination to make. Henderson closed the folder with a decisive snap. I've reviewed your file. 3 weeks of employment, multiple complaints from staff about your inability to keep pace, questions about your motor function, and now this incident. He stood, walking to the window with his hands clasped behind his back. I'm terminating your employment effective immediately. You'll surrender your badge and any hospital property. Security will escort you out. Helen's jaw tightened. And the general? The man whose life I saved? Does his opinion matter? The general is in surgery for the next 6 hours, under the care of our chief of surgery, who, I might add, is furious about your interference. When he wakes, he'll be informed that a nurse made an impulsive decision during his care. Henderson turned back to face her. Miss Pearson, I'm going to be frank with you. If you make any trouble about this, if you go to the press, if you dispute this termination, if you make any noise whatsoever, I will personally ensure that your nursing license is reviewed by the state board. I will make certain that every hospital in Virginia knows about this incident. You will never work in medicine again. The threat hung in the air like poison. Helen stood there for a long moment, her hands clasped in front of her. The tremor was back, subtle but present. She looked small again, defeated, just another broken person crushed by a system designed to protect itself.
I understand, she said quietly. Good. Henderson nodded to the security guards. Gentlemen, please escort Miss Pearson out. They gave her 15 minutes to clean out her locker. She didn't have much. A spare pair of scrubs, a battered thermos, a photo she kept tucked in the back that she never looked at. The photo showed a younger Helen in desert camouflage, surrounded by soldiers with their arms around each other, all of them grinning despite the dust and heat. She'd been trying to forget that version of herself. Apparently, she'd succeeded too well. The walk through the hospital to the exit was a gauntlet of stairs. Word had spread fast. Some nurses looked away, others whispered. Dr. Sterling watched from the nurses' station with his arms crossed, a smug satisfaction plastered across his face. Madison, the young nurse who'd witnessed the trauma bay incident, caught Helen's arm as she passed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. What you did was incredible. It wasn't fair." Helen managed a small smile. "Life rarely is, but thank you." The security guards deposited her at the main entrance and watched as she walked to the bus stop in the rain that had started falling. No umbrella, no coat, just Helen Pearson, former nurse, former lieutenant colonel, former ghost, standing in the rain waiting for a bus that would take her away from another failed attempt at normalcy. The bus arrived 10 minutes later. Helen climbed aboard, swiped her card, and found a seat in the back. She pressed her forehead against the cool window and closed her eyes. "You tried," she told herself. "You tried to be small. You tried to disappear. Maybe it's time to accept that some people are too broken for the quiet life." The bus pulled away from the curb, merging into afternoon traffic. It made it exactly 4 blocks before the convoy appeared. 3 black SUVs with government plates materialized from nowhere, forming a barricade that forced the bus driver to slam on the brakes. The passengers lurched forward with shouts of alarm and confusion. "What the hell?" the driver started. The doors of the SUVs opened simultaneously, and military personnel emerged. Not regular army. These were full-dress uniforms, the kind worn for official ceremonies and burials. An Air Force colonel Helen recognized from the trauma bay approached the bus. Behind him, armed Marines in their dress blues stood at attention. The bus door hissed open.
Colonel Mitchell stepped aboard, his eyes scanning the confused passengers until they found Helen in the back. "Lieutenant Colonel Pearson, you need to come with us." Helen didn't move. "I'm retired, Colonel. I'm nobody." "Ma'am, with all due respect, you're being requested at St. Jude's Medical Center immediately." "I was just fired from St. Jude's." "Yes, ma'am, we're aware." Mitchell's expression was unreadable. "We're also aware that you saved General Snyder's life. The general is out of surgery, he's conscious, and he's asking for you specifically." He paused. "This isn't a request, ma'am. This is a direct order from a 4-star general." The other passengers stared. Someone was filming on their phone. Helen stood slowly, gathering her small bag. "Guess I don't have much choice." "No, ma'am, you don't." The convoy ride back to St. Jude's was silent. Helen sat in the back of the lead SUV, watching the city blur past, wondering what fresh humiliation waited for her. Maybe Henderson had decided firing her wasn't enough. Maybe they were going to arrest her after all, make an example out of her to protect Sterling's reputation. When they pulled up to the hospital's main entrance, Helen noticed something odd. There were more military vehicles in the parking lot. A lot more. Staff cars and news vans lined the streets. Something big was happening. Colonel Mitchell opened her door personally. "If you'll follow me, ma'am." He led her not to Henderson's office or a security room, but to the main conference hall, a massive space usually reserved for fundraisers and medical conferences. The doors were closed, but Helen could hear voices inside. Lots of voices. Mitchell pushed open the doors. The room was packed. Every doctor, nurse, and administrator from the trauma unit stood facing a raised platform where a podium had been set up. News cameras lined the back wall. Hospital security stood at attention along the sides. And on the platform, in full dress uniform, stood more military brass than Helen had seen in one place since her retirement ceremony. At the center of it all was General James Mitchell, no relation to the colonel, a 3-star with a reputation for not suffering fools. He was holding a leather dossier. The room fell silent as Helen entered. Every head turned. Dr. Sterling stood near the front, his face pale. Henderson was there too, looking like a man watching his career crumble in real time.
"Lieutenant Colonel Pearson," General Mitchell said, his voice carrying across the room. "Please join us." Helen walked down the center aisle on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The crowd parted like water. She climbed the steps to the platform, and Mitchell gestured for her to stand beside him. "Many of you," the general began, addressing the room, "have been working alongside this woman for 3 weeks. You formed opinions about her competence, her abilities, her place in this hospital. I'm here to provide some additional context." He opened the dossier. "Lieutenant Colonel Helen Pearson, United States Army Medical Corps, retired. 26 years of service, 3 combat tours, holder of the Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor Device, Purple Heart, and the Combat Medical Badge with 3 stars. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sterling's face had gone from pale to gray. Mitchell continued, his voice cutting through the whispers. "The Silver Star was awarded for her actions in Fallujah, 2007. Her unit was ambushed. The combat surgeon was killed in the initial blast. Lieutenant Colonel Helen Pearson, then a captain, took command of a triage station while under continuous fire. She performed 11 field surgeries over a 14-hour period, including 3 thoracotomies and multiple arterial repairs, all while enemy rounds were impacting within 50 meters of her position. 16 men survived who shouldn't have. They called her the ghost medic because she operated in conditions that would have paralyzed most surgeons." Helen stared at the floor, her hands trembling, not from nerve damage, from the weight of memories she'd buried coming back to life.
The nerve damage in her hands, Mitchell said, holding up a medical document, was caused by a secondary IED blast that threw her against a Humvee while she was carrying a wounded Marine to safety. The tremor is permanent. It's also the least important thing about her as a medical professional, because Lieutenant Colonel Helen Pearson has forgotten more about trauma medicine than most of the people in this room will ever learn. He closed the dossier and looked directly at Henderson. I understand she was terminated today for saving the life of General Jimmy Snyder, for performing a needle decompression that your chief resident somehow missed despite it being a textbook presentation of tension pneumothorax. His voice dropped to something dangerous. For doing her job while your staff played politics. Henderson opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Here's what's going to happen. Lieutenant Colonel Helen Pearson will be reinstated immediately with full back pay and a formal apology. The complaint against her will be withdrawn and expunged from all records, and this hospital will implement mandatory training on how to identify and treat tension pneumothorax, since apparently that's somehow not common knowledge among your surgical staff. Sterling made a small, strangled sound. Mitchell wasn't finished. Dr. Preston Sterling, you are hereby banned from providing medical care to any active-duty military or veterans. Your actions today demonstrated a level of incompetence and ego that would have killed one of our nation's most distinguished officers. We will be forwarding our findings to the Virginia State Medical Board. He paused. Security will escort you from the premises. 2 Marines moved forward. Sterling backed away, his perfect composure finally shattering. You can't! My father is a senator! This is— Your father, Mitchell said coldly, called me personally to apologize for raising a son with more arrogance than skill. Get him out of here. They dragged Sterling toward the exit as he continued to protest, his voice growing shrill. The massive doors slammed shut behind him, cutting off his complaints. The room remained silent. Helen stood on the platform, feeling like she was watching this happen to someone else. This wasn't what she wanted. She didn't want vindication or justice or any of this attention. She wanted what she'd always wanted, to disappear into a quiet life where the screaming stopped. There's one more thing, Mitchell said softly. The side door opened, and they wheeled him in. General Jimmy Snyder sat in a wheelchair pushed by a Navy corpsman, his chest heavily bandaged, an IV line running from both arms. He looked like hell, pale and drawn, but his eyes were clear and focused on Helen. The corpsman wheeled him to the base of the platform. The general raised one hand weakly, signaling to stop. "Sir," the general said quietly, "the doctors said you need to rest." "Help me up," Snyder said. His voice was rough, damaged from the trauma and intubation, but the command was unmistakable. "Sir, you can't." "That's an order, son." The corpsman looked helplessly at the medical staff, but nobody moved. How do you tell a 4-star general he can't stand? With the corpsman's assistance, General Snyder rose from the wheelchair. It was clearly agonizing. His face went white, sweat broke on his forehead, and his legs shook with effort. But he stood.
And then, slowly, with the kind of determination that had carried him through 4 decades of military service, General Jimmy Snyder brought his right hand up in a salute. It wasn't quick, it wasn't crisp. Every inch of movement cost him, but he held that salute with unwavering precision, his eyes locked on Helen's. The entire room held its breath. Helen's hand came up automatically, muscle memory from a life she'd tried to leave behind. Her trembling fingers steadied as they touched her forehead in return. 2 soldiers, separated by rank and years and circumstances, connected by a moment of perfect understanding. They held the salute for what felt like forever. Then Snyder spoke, his voice carrying despite its roughness. "The ghost medic. I've heard stories about you, Colonel. Legends. I never thought I'd have the privilege of meeting you, let alone owing you my life." He lowered his hand slowly. "They were wrong about you. Every single person who doubted you, who mocked you, who treated you like you didn't belong.
You're exactly where you're supposed to be." Helen's eyes glistened. "Just doing my job, sir." "No, Colonel. You're doing what you've always done, running toward the fire when everyone else is running away. That's not just a job. That's who you are." The general swayed slightly, and the corpsman immediately moved to support him back into the wheelchair. But before he sat, Snyder looked out at the assembled staff, at the doctors and nurses and administrators who'd spent 3 weeks treating Helen like she was invisible. "This woman," he said, "is worth more than this entire room combined, and if I ever hear that anyone has disrespected her again, I will make it my personal mission to ensure they regret it. Are we clear?" A chorus of "Yes, sir" echoed through the hall. They wheeled the general out, but the weight of his words remained. Helen stood on the platform, surrounded by people who'd spent weeks making her feel worthless, and for the first time since arriving at St. Jude's, she stood with her spine straight and her head high. Colonel Mitchell stepped close and spoke quietly. "You don't have to stay here, you know. We could arrange a position at Walter Reed, Bethesda, anywhere you want. You've earned the right to choose." Helen looked out at the crowd, at Madison, who was crying, at Dr. Reeves, who was smiling, at the empty space where Sterling had stood. "If I think," Helen said slowly, "I'll stay right here. Someone needs to teach these people how to actually practice medicine." Mitchell smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. Welcome back, Lieutenant Colonel." The news cameras captured it all. The retired war hero who'd been mocked and fired, only to be vindicated by the very general she'd saved. The story would be everywhere by evening. Sterling's career was over. Henderson would probably survive, but his reputation was permanently stained. And Helen? Helen Pearson, the ghost medic, the woman with shaking hands and a quiet voice who'd been invisible for 3 weeks, was finally, undeniably seen. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the hospital parking lot where Sterling was being escorted to his car by security, his white coat stripped away, his arrogance shattered. Helen watched from a window as he drove away. She didn't feel satisfaction or revenge or any of the things she thought she might feel. She just felt tired, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit proud. Because some battles you win not by being the loudest or the flashiest or the most arrogant, but simply refusing to quit when everyone expects you to break. Helen pressed her palm against the window, her hand trembling slightly, and smiled. The ghost medic was back, and this time she wasn't hiding anymore.